Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm talking about the solar eclipse in Scorpio on the 25th of October, and I'm going to look at that eclipse in its setting of all the other alignments around that particular day. And I'm going to pick a few things that I think are rather interesting, and I hope that you'll find them interesting too. So let's start as we mean to go on. Let's get in there, talk about the eclipse. Now, this eclipse is a partial eclipse, but in terms of the astrology, that makes no difference. Just because it's partial doesn't mean it doesn't pack a powerful punch. And in fact, I believe this eclipse and the one to come on the 8th of November, total lunar eclipse, part of a pair, a season of eclipses, if you like, are really going to be very powerful indeed. Definitely in terms of global events. And of course, if they connect with anything in your natal charts, then you're probably going to have some things going on that are going to make for life landmarks, or certainly developments that change the shape of things for you. And of course, I'm going to be talking about those kind of things as we get a little bit further on. I'm going to look at the meaning of this eclipse from the perspective of the sign you are. In other words, what house it takes place in. But first, I want to have a sort of general discussion about this, because this solar eclipse is up close and personal to Venus, very closely attached to this planet. Now, Venus is the planet of love, and we tend to associate all sorts of good things with Venus. We look at Venus for money. We look at Venus for fair play, for unity, for form, for mediation, for all sorts of things that seem to bring about balance and harmony. And so you would think, looking at this, that a solar eclipse linked to Venus has to be a wonderful thing. Now, it may coincide or may be the marker for some very wonderful and beautiful events. I'm not saying it won't be. But what we have to bear in mind about eclipses is that they're game changers. And even if there are beautiful events that happen, remember there's going to be a sting in the tail. We're not seeing all that the eclipse has to offer us. We're only seeing the initial impact of the eclipse, the event that marks the development, what goes on from there. And the same really with difficult events that have the signature of the eclipse on them. We will not know at the time where they lead to, but almost always they lead to some very positive things. So always remember there's something hidden in there. And I think the word I used, the phrase I used a couple of minutes ago, the idea of an eclipse having a sting in the tail, is really very appropriate for this eclipse because it's in the sign of Scorpio. And if you know, Scorpion has a sting in its tail. And so this is probably very much apropos of this particular solar eclipse. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about in reference to this eclipse is what I do when I look at the new moon, full moon cycle. First, to remember that the timeline of an eclipse is quite elastic. You know, events of major importance will have happened weeks beforehand, as well as they'll stretch into weeks afterwards, up to Christmas and even past Christmas. That's one thing to remember. But also, like I always do on these videos, is look at the new moon, which is the beginning of a 6-month cycle. So that the things you begin, the things that happen around the time of the new moon have their completion date 6 months hence. And on this occasion, we're looking at the 5th of May, next year, 2023, when there will be a lunar eclipse at that time. But also, when we think about the new moon itself, as soon as the moon is new, it starts to wax, and it waxes until it reaches full moon, roughly 14 days later. So there is a small cycle as well. And given that this solar eclipse is going to lead to a total lunar eclipse in 2 weeks' time, we can see that this 2-week period is of great importance. And all those things that come about, maybe some of the announcements, the developments in long-standing situations, all sorts of things that happen in this 2-week cycle are going to be really, really important, and we'll see even further ramifications of them around the time of the total lunar eclipse. So that's certainly something to bear in mind. Now, there are other aspects of this new moon that I want to talk about, the solar eclipse, and that is because there was another one in 2014 on exactly the same day. In other words, an eclipse that is of the same degree. So you yourselves can look back and think about that October period of 2014 and see what was significant about that time. Because either there's a resonance coming from that time, there's a direct relationship between events then and events in the October, late October, early November period of this year, or there are new developments, but they have a kind of, they smack of the feelings or the taste, the texture of those events that happened in 2014, which is about 8 years ago. And this is quite interesting, looked at through the portals of history in our current situation, because in 2014, Ukraine was in the process of a revolution, and it got rid of its pro-Russian president, and that sent all the alarm bells off in the Kremlin, and Putin then annexed Crimea. And so you can see there is a direct reference to the events of 2014 and the events of 2022. But with October in mind, we might want to look at the portents for October and early November being very important for the war in Ukraine, what we might call fateful developments, turning points that take the war in another direction. I'd like to think of this and the total lunar eclipse as marking the end, or certainly, well, we've talked about the beginning of the end, didn't we, in August. So this is another stage of this final part of what will happen in Ukraine. So let's have a little look at the eclipse in terms of the astrology, and I'm going to have a look at that right now. So we can see here, I've set this from London on this occasion, and the reason for that is that I'm going to be talking about Prince William in regard to this solar eclipse, in as much as this solar eclipse will have a resonance with Ukraine and the development in the Ukraine war. Well, we're going to see this solar eclipse having a relevance or a resonance to do with Prince William. We'll come to that shortly. Let's have a look at this eclipse. We can see it up there in the kind of 10 o'clock position, the sun and moon at 2 degrees of Scorpio, and just by the moon is Venus also at 2 degrees. That's why we can see there's a cluster in the sky here, as it were. And we have Mercury a little bit before that. And if we look at the degree of Mercury, we see it's 23 degrees of Libra. And we can see that in point of fact, it's not too far from 26 degrees of Capricorn. And you'd be right, because in a handful of days' time, on the 27th of October, Mercury will be squaring Pluto. And in fact, there's been a lot of Plutonic movement, we might call it, really from about middle, even before that, the early part of October. And with Venus and the Sun squaring Pluto on the 19th and 20th of October, 5 days before this eclipse. And so we can see that not only is this an eclipse in Scorpio, whose ruling planet is Pluto, but that Pluto is playing a big part in the narrative. And what does Pluto do? Pluto brings things that are buried to the surface. So we get a lot of things to do with scandals. It also brings aspects of the past that we thought were done and dusted into the present again. And that can be for each of us in some way, or again, we see this drama being played out on the global stage. We also think of Pluto as this planet that makes small things big and big things smaller so that we can see them more. Through the aid of the microscope, we can see things bigger that are tiny. And with the aid of a telescope, we can see things far away. We see what they are. And this really is a metaphor for what we get with this particular eclipse, and also all the aspects to Pluto. You get events kind of magnified, but then we can see them more. And sometimes we can see those things that seem quite small in effect suddenly becoming much bigger. Now, I think also with Pluto, we do have to bring in this idea of the underground. So this eclipse may tell us a lot about what's been going on in the underground. It may have a lot to do with intelligence and espionage. It may also tell us a lot about the power of events that we didn't know about, because as well as this image of Pluto that can make bigger, we think of splitting the atom. So we get things to do with radiation. Now, I'm not trying to scare the horses by bringing this up. I'm just giving you a picture of how this eclipse and its proximity, really Mercury, Venus and the Sun to Pluto in the days before, can play into events at the time. Now, another thing that happens just prior to this eclipse is that Saturn turns stationary direct. Now, Saturn has been retrograde since June the 4th, so it's been going backwards over events, again, whether they're in our own life or whether we can see there have been things which are being reviewed and old ground having been gone over. But as soon as Saturn turns direct, it moves forward again. It marks the end of the shadow period. So we're in the post-shadow period, which means that it's going forward over the ground that it was once going backwards over. And so a lot of things come to light. And this process goes on until the 26th of January, 2023. In fact, if we look at the entire shadow period, it is almost a year long. And of course, a lot of things have happened this year that we mark this year with, whether it is the death of our great monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, or whether it is the war in Ukraine, whether it is all the things to do with the economy and finances. It's been a huge and massive year. So we will want to look at Saturn now going over that ground again, but forwards this time, to see if some progress can at last be made with some of the things that have caused us such pain. Now, I'm going to be talking about Saturn at the end of my video today, so that I pick up on this idea that Saturn really isn't a bad thing. Of course, it challenges us, but really to think of Saturn as this old bogey, as this demon. I've heard Saturn described as a demon, which really isn't the case. And I think we'll start to see this, I hope, or understand it more as I talk to you about this at the end of my video. Jupiter will go back into Pisces on the 28th of October. It will stay at the very end of Pisces. So if you've got a birthday, sort of around the 15th to the 21st of March, it's going to have more of an effect on you. And this might mean opportunities coming back to you, and an opportunity in a way to make progress that you haven't been able to make before. And it's going to stay until Pisces, until Christmas, when it then goes back into Aries and starts its long march forward in Aries. Mars turns retrograde in Gemini on the 30th, and that is an interesting thing, because normally when Mars turns, Mars is in a sign for perhaps 6 weeks or so, but because it's turning retrograde in the sign of Gemini, there's 8 months effectively when Mars is in Gemini. So I think particularly if you are a Gemini, or you know you have Mars in Gemini, this is going to give you an opportunity to rethink a few of the actions you've taken. We often do actions in haste when we've got a strong Mars transit. And so now might be the opportunity to go back on those actions and think again and redo them. It's a positive thing, not a negative thing. And even if some things that were gathering pace and seem to be heading in the right direction now head in a new direction, it's purposeful, and that it will be something to remember. But let's come back to me just for a second, because I wanted to say to you before we look at our next chart, that if you do have this eclipse on a planet or point in your own chart, don't get too steamed up about it, in the sense of what I've been talking about, the idea of a sting in a tail. And so you're starting to focus on the kind of negative aspects of what this eclipse may do. What we need to think about is a solar eclipse acts like a new moon on steroids. So it's a wonderful new start. So whatever the circumstances that you find yourself in around the time of this eclipse, and you can relate to this eclipse on your planet and point, remember what it's offering you is a new start, a new beginning, and that's always got to be a great thing. So let's come back and have a look at Prince William's chart and see why I think this eclipse is so significant for him. So as you can see here, we've got the midheaven at 2 degrees of Scorpio 28. So in fact, that's right on the eclipse degree. And up close and personal to that is Jupiter. Jupiter at 0 degrees of Scorpio. Pluto rules his midheaven, and you know we've got a lot of Pluto aspects around that time. In fact, Pluto is at 24 of Libra. So currently Pluto is in a square to his natal. Pluto, we're moving away from that point now, it's fading, but it was certainly very intense throughout 2021 in particular. And of course, in 2020, when we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, considering he was born on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that would have been a very important year for him in terms of his destiny. And now we are learning a lot about the Queen and how she was suffering during that period of time. And it would have been known in 2020. We can start to make a sense of why there was so much change going on in the royal family with the pecking order, and with a sense of really gathering pace that something needed to be ensured in the event that Her Majesty was to die within the next 2-3 years, which of course did in fact transpire. So we can see all this has been taking place with William and Kate being very much front forward in the monarchy, and Prince William always present at the important events with his father, now the king. We can see perhaps that with this solar eclipse on his Jupiter midheaven point, there is yet another important development in his role around this time. He's already been given the title of the Prince of Wales, but this looks as though there is going to be a title of even more significance around the time of this eclipse. So again, let's look at that elastic timeline, October, November, December, for it to play out. More importantly, William was born on an eclipse. So if you are born on an eclipse like William, then the eclipses, whenever they are, wherever they are, whenever they come, are going to be important for your unfolding of your destiny too. And if I go back to 2020, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, there was a solar eclipse on his birthday in that year. And that's why I say that everything that happened in 2020, the plans laid down for the future of the monarchy with William front forward, were definitely taking place there, and we may see more about that story in and around the October, November, December period of this year. Interestingly enough, Princess Catherine, our Princess Kate, was also born on an eclipse in the same year. She was born on a lunar eclipse, a sun opposition the moon, which of course was triggered on her birthday by that lunar eclipse in 2020, the couple of days before the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that really heralded everything that's happened to us in the past 2 years, whether it is the onset of the virus, whether it was, as I thought of it, the reformation of land and suggesting Putin would make a land grab. Well, he didn't make it in 2020, and he might probably have made it in 2021, were it not for all the troubles with the virus. But we have since seen that come to pass. And of course, we have also seen the passing of the Queen. So a great deal has happened in these 2.5 years that really we can see, as not exactly a story of the eclipses, but we certainly see the narrative in the chart here. So let me put that away and come on to talk about other things. And what I'm going to sort of go straight into, really and truly, is the idea of what this solar eclipse may mean for you, sign by sign. So I'm going to start off with Scorpio. And of course, if it's your birthday on that eclipse, or we could say the 24th, 25th, 26th, those 3 days around that eclipse, then this is going to make its mark on your year ahead. So not only is it a year of fresh starts, but those fresh starts come about in extraordinary ways. They literally make a division. They draw a line in the sand from who you were and what happened before to who you are now and where you're going. Now, with Venus involved in this, there may be a love story in the mix. And it could be a new love affair for you that morphs into the most important relationship of your life. Or it could be that a relationship that is already in existence must go in order for a destined match to come in. So we're talking about that very specifically with birthdays around the solar eclipse, but we can talk in general terms about that eclipse for Scorpios, especially if you've got something else at 2 degrees of Scorpio, particularly the ascendant at 2 degrees, because the ascendant is the opposite end to the descendant. That is known as the relationship axis. So anything affecting either end of that brings relationships into it. But certainly the angles of your chart, if you've got the midheaven like William, 2 degrees of Scorpio, if you've got the IC, 2 degrees of Scorpio, because the MC is 2 degrees of Taurus, then it still means there are important life changes occurring to you, powerful ones that come out from nowhere, but I promise you, they've had their origins in a deep past. So it's why we could also say it's a part of your destiny as well. I mean, all eclipses have this destined quality about them, but particularly in light of falling on the angles of your chart or on planets and points at that particular degree. So new beginnings is what we could loosely describe for all Scorpio with this eclipse. And we could also say that these new beginnings get rid of the past. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, we need to think of our past is part of us. And yes, we can look back at the past and find treasures in there that enrich our lives. But so often there are parts of our past that are not very nice. And if we keep digging around in there, then they affect us negatively in the present. So this solar eclipse gives you an opportunity to say about the past, it's done, that's it. We're on to a new trajectory. But anything that happens around the time of the eclipse or in the 2 weeks following it, and it strikes you as, wow, that's interesting, that is certainly part of the eclipse story for you. New beginnings, changes to you at core level, your persona, the way you come across to other people, your persona, that's what your persona is, but also at core level, those changes that bring about directional changes in your life and changes in all aspects of it. Now, if we come to Taurus, then this solar eclipse is taking place in the area of relationships. So we're well and truly at new beginnings. Perhaps you've even got an anniversary coming up, or there's something happening in your relationship or in your working relationship. If you're signed up to a company, you can see there's new projects coming in, a new order coming in, and that's going to affect your relationship with the company, your relationship with your significant other or other people. It can be a very good thing because we need fresh air. We need new things coming into our relationships, otherwise they get stale. But of course, we can be looking at a whole new relationship coming in, and if it's signaled by an eclipse, my goodness, that's a fateful relationship. Now, let's get this clear. It doesn't mean that if a relationship starts around this time or within the next couple of weeks, that this is the relationship that will end happily ever after, and you will go into the sunset with this person. By no means. We can have a relationship that is the most important relationship in our lives because it changes us, and the things that happen during the course of that relationship are life-changing. But it doesn't mean a happy ever after scenario, just that that person is our teacher and is making manifest part of our potential and part of our destiny too. It is a good idea to think about making concrete things that have to do with other people, whether that's consolidating plans for the future, whether it's putting in dates and things like that, and also setting new goals for all kinds of relationships. That eclipse is very good, is because it's got that effect of being a new moon on steroids, as I said earlier. But we must always remember with an eclipse that there's a sting in the tail. There's something we don't see and we can't see. We're not meant to see it. But that doesn't mean you don't go forward. It doesn't mean you don't go forward into a new relationship. You don't go forward with your plans. But it just means we're aware that's not going to be the whole story. When we look at Leo, then this solar eclipse is in the 4th house. Now, the 4th house is our beginnings. It's where we came from. So it has everything to do with our ancestry and our family. It has to do with our upbringing, how we grew from baby to toddler to child to adolescent until we were eventually ready to leave home and go out in the world on our own. And of course, where are we out in the world? We're with the 10th house. We're with the midheaven. So these two areas of life are always connected because we are who we are out in the world through our upbringing, through our parenting, through our ancestors. So this solar eclipse could be a very important piece of the puzzle. If, let's say, you were looking actively to find out about your ancestry, this could be an amazing breakthrough. You would understand all sorts of things about why you are the way you are. And I would encourage this. It may be that something is now about to change in the home front, on the home front. So it has to do with perhaps new people coming into the family or other people moving out of the family, whether that's because there's an upset or because they move to the other side of the world, because that's part of their job or part of their life. And since Venus is involved, we might consider that perhaps some of the changes that suddenly come out of left field in terms of this lunar eclipse are to do with family and what's happening to various members of the family. It may be a good time to consider your home itself. Is this now where I'm happy? Remember, home should be a sanctuary. And if there are aspects of the home, whether it's in the appearance of the home or the running of the home, that aren't comfortable and they're not nice, then this is the change that needs to come about. But it may also signify a reason that you need to move home, whether that's something that you're very positive and happy about, or whether it's quite the reverse and you're not very happy about it. But because the 4th house is linked to the 10th house, because the IC is the opposite end to the MC, then we could be looking at developments in your job and in your material circumstances that lead to domestic changes and home and property changes. If we flip this on its head and we come to Aquarius, then the new moon solar eclipse is taking place high overhead. It's in the area of life direction, where I'm going in life. I'm building my future up here at the midheaven. I'm carving out my own niche in the world. So that this often has much to do with your career, your job, the things that define you and your role in life. So the solar eclipse could mark a promotion, a stunning new opportunity, something that you think of at the time as fantastic, how amazingly this will affect your world. Remember the sting in the tail, though. The changes that may come about could also be challenging as they come about. But that doesn't mean you don't accept it or you don't go forward. It's just the idea of thinking, giving a kind of panoramic view of an eclipse, not just one small aspect of it. So that either during the course of October, could have happened, I suppose, a little earlier, even in September, or it goes forward into November, even December, there could be announcements or changes regarding your career. And that will metamorphosize. You will metamorphosize. Is that a word? But you know what I mean. There will be a metamorphosis of your role in life. Now, of course, a role in life can also be parent, child, all sorts of things can be a role in life, and they're not necessarily linked to your career. So let's see that this too can also have an enormous change. And again, if we think back to Prince William, because this is happening in his 10th house, this solar eclipse is midheaven 10th house. So we are also looking at some kind of metamorphosis for him too. So let's move on to Pisces. And with Pisces, we're looking at this solar eclipse in the 9th house. And that's all about life out there. It's life stretching out into new territory. I actually love the 9th house. I'm always thrilled when I've got a 9th house transit. I'm glad I've got some 9th house planets because it gives you a great interest in the world, in different cultures, in what's going on in different parts of the world. How can I expand my knowledge? How can I grow in experience? It gives that sense of a purpose linked to knowledge, experience, travel, widening horizons. So the solar eclipse may actually prompt a journey, and it may come about through unexpected circumstances. Maybe that journey is imminent or before Christmas, around the Christmas period, or maybe it's much beyond that time into next year. But whatever journey this solar eclipse has portended, it's going to be life-changing. Now, I often think when we do visit different countries or we expose ourselves to different cultures, it can be life-changing. We come back and do things very differently. But it can also mean that our horizons in terms of where we thought we were going are going to change by an event. Whether that event is one that makes us jump up and down, and we really think of, channeling Venus here, so it's a lovely event, or whether it's something that we don't think is terribly lovely, but it involves changes to our horizons in some way, and maybe also some kind of journey. But remember, journeys are taken in so many ways. when I write a book, or even when I write an article, I think of it as a journey, because I begin not being 100% sure what the ending will be like. I have a few ideas of where I'm going, but the journey itself actually is the journey. It gets me to the end, and I've gone through all sorts of different avenues in my writing and research as I do that. So the same thing can be said of anything in life. That solar eclipse offers you so much in the way of growth, experience, knowledge, and maybe even physical travel as well. So Virgo, if we come to you, then we're seeing this in the third house. And the third house also has a lot to do with travel. It has a lot to do with communication, learning, education. But it tends to be on what I call a more localized level. So here we're thinking about the context of the life as you know it, in your small world. So a solar eclipse brings about something new in your small world. And that can be the world of your neighborhood, the world of the neighborhood of your family, which means brothers and sisters and the extended family, cousins, and so on. So there could be developments that change the game in those kind of areas of life. It could be an indication that starting a new course for skills or for knowledge is really a good plan, or it may be that this just symbolizes the journey you're about to take in knowledge and in skills. It may also bring about information to you that you are surprised about. Around the time of this eclipse, news coming to you, whether in the form of an email or a text or a phone call or running into somebody or some other kind of notification, really changes your perspective. I also say when you change your thinking, you change outcomes, you change your view, everything. So there's a big change in thinking coming to you. And it's a good thing, even if it does mean you've got to throw out the old and embrace the new. Remember, that's Pluto as well, isn't it? Scorpio, Pluto, we've got all of this happening, coloring the eclipse. So we need to get rid of the old. We need to bring about the new. And of course, in many ways, taking a little point away from this at the moment, that is the general idea of this eclipse as well. It's about regeneration. It's about getting rid of old systems that don't work and ultimately replacing them with new systems. So this eclipse has a purging quality to it. It helps you get rid of that which is toxic in your life. And that's just a general point to every sign of the zodiac. But yes, for you specifically, Virgo, we're thinking about this idea of getting a new thought process, a new mindset. And with that, changes everything. If we come to Gemini now, we're looking at a solar eclipse in the 6th house. So we are in the area of life where we think about our life being a kind of service. Again, I'm reminded of the Queen, who always talked about her sense of service being very strong and that she came to serve us. And even though she was powerful and all those things, she never ever stopped, or we all understood how much she served us. And if we can get this right in our own lives so that we don't feel abused by performing services for other people, what we feel instead is a kind of gift we're giving, and we give it freely and of ourselves. That's really a wonderful thing. So this solar eclipse for you, Gemini, might offer you an opportunity to be of service. And of course, you will want to grasp it, because that's why the eclipse has brought it into manifestation. It's also about work, this area of life. So there may be unexpected changes in your work routine, changes in the workplace with the workforce, or indeed even changes of jobs. It's a pretty big feast to kind of choose from when it comes to this solar eclipse. And we also need to put in there things to do with our health, because the sixth house has a lot to do with the system by which our lives run. And our systems run our health too. So this solar eclipse may expose something that needs to be looked at, which will be of benefit to us. And starting some kind of new regime is a good plan, whether that's to do with the health of mind, body, and spirit, or whether it is simply something we have to do because we have no choice. Whatever it is, this new cycle, this new system is ultimately of great benefit. If we look at the opposite sign, Sagittarius, then this eclipse is taking place in the 12th house, this area of the unconscious mind, one of the more spiritual areas of our horoscope. We do a lot of processing in the 12th house. And of course, some of that processing happens in dreams. We might call it housekeeping, psychological housekeeping. We go through things in our dreams that are reframing them and repolishing them and throwing, getting sorted with them. So this may be a powerful time for you in terms of both the enrichment of your spiritual journey, and you may actively embrace that and understand it. Or it may be that there are a lot of things that are going to take place that you have no idea what they mean. You are completely in the dark about them. Something happens, an event takes place, and you think, why? What can I do with this? I don't understand it. Well, you may not understand it at first. It may take time. It will start trickling down to you, either through dreams or maybe through those times when, for no reason at all, we suddenly get a flash of insight. So epiphanies that happen around this time of the eclipse. And remember, we give it a good time span, but particularly if we get it as near to the eclipse as possible, then any epiphanies and awakenings are very purposeful and need to be grabbed completely. I think, too, what happens, because, of course, the sun will be moving through the 12th house anyway, and this solar eclipse, that's why it's taking place in the 12th house. When we think about how sometimes we feel imprisoned by our circumstances, we feel somehow we don't have everything we need. We can't seem to get out of the position we're in. And I know how that feels, and you may feel it at this particular time. But, it's not going to be there forever. It's just how you feel at the time. And I think if you can say that to yourself and understand it that way, it will take away some of the anxiety and panic that this new moon eclipse may bring about. But in its most positive face, this solar eclipse does offer a real burst of understanding, a real growth in your consciousness and spirituality. And that's a nice thing to think about. We come on to Aries. We're looking at a solar eclipse in the 8th house. Again, this is an area like the 12th house. It's kind of difficult to understand. We probably find it easier to understand when we think about money, because this is one of the financial houses of the horoscope. But it's particularly other people's money, which is why inheritances and settlements and those kind of things belong in the 8th house. It's also to do with one's partner's money, or the money we share and have responsibility with other people. And of course, that can mean you're in business with other people, or it can mean you have agreements with banks and lending institutions, credit card companies, all of that. So a solar eclipse here can indicate a new agreement, a new source of income. It can indicate an inheritance or some kind of monies coming to you that you didn't expect. They come, not of your own making exactly, although when we think about a settlement, obviously we have had a part of that, but then the other person must settle, or the other company must settle, and you will get the benefits of that. So that solar eclipse may bring about unearned income to you, which is a good prospect. However, let's remember the sting in the tail. If monies do come to you, there will be jealousies and there will be upsets for sure. So set yourself in a mode whereby you do quite a lot of diplomatic work when it comes to any unearned income coming your way. But this area is also about intimacy. It's where we share ourselves with other people. It's where we receive from other people. And so intimacy has a part to play in that. So in some cases, Aries, it could indicate a new intimate relationship beginning or a new stage in an intimate relationship. We like to think of this as being something beautiful and something that will enrich us. And yes, maybe it will. But remember, Pluto, sting in the tail, that perhaps there's something that might ultimately not be so good for us. So go carefully. Let it expose you to growth and where you've never been before, emotionally, sexually, whatever. But never forget to have some defenses in place. Now, if we come to Libra, then this solar eclipse is taking place in yet another area of money and self-worth. This is not where you share money, though. This is your money. This is what you make, how you make it. It's also what you give of yourself in terms of your value and how people treat us. It's so important, isn't it? It's lovely to be valued when we see that in other people, and it's very warming and it breeds confidence. And when we're confident about ourselves, we can go, we can set the bar high, we can go forward and feel confident. And also when we're making good money, we feel like, great, I've got security, stability, a roof over my head. What happens when we get a solar eclipse here? Yes, indeed, there may be a new source of income, which will be very appreciated. But it can also be a new phase for your for income. And that is a bit of a broader picture, because it may mean your income can change and decrease. And so you have to think of new solar eclipse ways in which to create income. That's what the loss of income is about if it happens here. It is about creating new ways of earning money, new ways with money, whether that means new ways of borrowing, new ways of investment, whatever it is. The solar eclipse is about the new and the different. It's not about same old, same old. There's also reputation here. And I think that sometimes a solar eclipse can do great things for your reputation. It can bring you into the foreground so that people notice you, and that can have all sorts of benefits. But what else happens when you go and you get more recognition? Your privacy goes. So that's something else to bear in mind about this solar eclipse. And always, in general, to all signs of the zodiac, a solar eclipse has a fated quality about it. Even if ultimately it's come from some action or connection you have made, when it happens, it's sort of random. So my last two signs, Capricorn and Cancer, we're looking at, for Capricorn, the new moon in the 11th house, this very humanitarian area of the horoscope. So maybe it may mean you're going to get very involved in humanitarian concerns. Somebody's going to invite you to join some kind of organization that helps others. Or maybe on your own bat, you suddenly think, I can't sit here doing nothing. I'm going to do that. I'm going to start offering my services. I'm going to pile efforts, energy, even money into helping others, but in a larger scale. It's looking out at groups and organizations. That's where the 11th house is. It's also about enterprise, the 11th house. So it can mean that there's a business enterprise that's going to start to be available to you. You're going to begin one, or you're going to be invited into one, some kind of startup organization, or something that definitely has a kind of cooperative feel to it. You and a whole group of other people coming together with a single idea. It's not corporate, it's individual in some way. It's got to do with a group ethos. Something new coming from there is good. And it may be now a possibility that if something has been lost, maybe a job or some other kind of aspect of your existence has changed, that it might now be worth thinking about, what can I do? Could I create a business? Is there something that I could do? But remember, sometimes with an eclipse, this idea there's a shadow, something you can't see. I think especially when you're joining with other people for a cooperative thing, it's all fine and dandy when it begins and everybody is focused on the end result, on the common good. As you know, with groups, over time, you end up with different views on things, and sometimes that can be powerful. So if you are starting an enterprise or getting involved in some kind of group event, protect yourself in some regard, especially if there's money involved, because a little further down the line, there could be problems. Okay. So finally, let's come to Cancer, and we're looking at the 5th house, the most creative area of the horoscope. It's in the 5th house that we give offerings of ourselves. So this is why it's a very artsy kind of house. We do a lot of crafts and arts in the 5th house. We also give of ourselves, when you think about it, when we have children. We're actually reproducing ourselves. And of course, where do we reproduce? How do we reproduce? We reproduce because we got together with someone. So a romance began at some point. This is why the 5th house is also romance. So we can see all sorts of things potentially there with this solar eclipse. Is it a new baby? Is it a new romance? Is it a new creative project? All those things are possible with this solar eclipse there. And I think, too, this part of the horoscope has a lot to do with our inner child, our ability to really do things that come so much from ourselves in our most precious place, if you like. So something may be sparked at this point, which will grow into something that's much bigger than ever you thought it would be. It could be anything almost. I'm hesitant to even give you a label to it, but just the idea that something comes to you, something's inspired, and you begin it, and whoa, where it will go to, you have no imagination. There's also this idea of children and the 5th house, that with a solar eclipse here, this may have something to do with one of your offspring. So it could be that something happens to them, or that they do something that brings them to the attention of others. They could be in the spotlight of life, or there could be things that happen to them, whether it's in school or if they're adult children in their lives. That means you now have to really perhaps take care of that situation. You have to be involved in it in some way. I'm not saying whether it's great and good or quite the reverse, but again, always with eclipses, it's something we didn't see coming. It's something we didn't expect. And so that happening to one of your offspring could be a wonderful thing, or it could be something that they, in turn, are a little bit upset about, and then they are your progeny, and your help and influence could be needed on a big scale. So there we are. I have gone through all 12 houses, and I think it gives you an insight. I know at part of this, I've forgotten which sign it was, it may have been Virgo, but I talked about something that I perhaps could have said earlier, this idea that this is a powerful purging, this particular eclipse. It's in the sign of Scorpio. It's closely angled also to Pluto. So we get the idea of things being purged, toxic situations, draining the swamp. All those things are very apropos. And it may be a time of turmoil because so many things are coming up to the surface. But ultimately, they need to come up to the surface, because that's how we can really deal with them and get rid of them. So also something else I was talking about earlier was Saturn turning direct, having been retrograde since June the 4th, now being direct again. It goes forward, and we start to make progress with some of those things that have been reevaluated or had to be gone through during the retrograde cycle. We're now going to take the seeds of all that, what we've learned, what we know, what we can put to good use, and we're going to go forward with that. And it made me think really about Saturn, because recently I heard someone talking about Saturn and saying Saturn was a demon. Quite literally, it was a demon. And I think that really it isn't Saturn at all. And if you get into that way of thinking, which is almost like magical thinking, it's going to take you down a very, very dark path indeed, and it's unnecessary. Saturn is, above all else, a teacher. And like a teacher who we don't like very much, because he's not a touchy-feely teacher. He's not a teacher that bounds into the classroom and has bells and whistles and sweeties for us all. He comes in, he's rather stern and has important information to impart. And he may be a little sober and pedantic, and he's telling us about things we don't really want to know about. But of course, these are the teachers in life, and I have them when I think about my childhood. Some of the teachers that I didn't look forward to, they turned out to give me the best of knowledge and understanding. And that really is Saturn's role. One of my clients, who's an artist, a great artist, and I was talking to her about Saturn. She had a visualization, not of Saturn in his kind of role as the Grim Reaper. We see the sickle and we think, it's not very nice. But instead, she saw him as a kind of, in a sort of blue, misty kind of blue. And interestingly enough, no eyes, a mouth, no eyes. And it was almost as though he's not making judgments on you. He's urging you to judge yourselves, in fact. That's what that is all about. So we think of Saturn, Saturn's role in our horoscope, Saturn's role in our life, while it does represent our weaknesses, our insecurities, the things we don't feel very confident about, well, things that we actually feel very bad about, things we can't do, things we don't like about ourselves, and we try very hard not to think about them and to avoid them at all costs. But of course, it's attending to those, turning those weaknesses into strengths that makes us strong. Saturn represents a skeleton in our bodies. And without that skeleton, we'd be all flesh, we'd be all over the place. And so that idea of getting the structure and substance into ourselves by facing up to things, by dealing with realities, even if that means looking at the reality of ourselves, which it does in large part, then that's something that Saturn helps us to do, and for which we must always give grateful thanks. Now, when you get a Saturn transit, so Saturn comes up to square itself, or even to trine or sextile its natal position, it's taking you back to its natal position. That's exactly what it's doing. You're triggering that natal response. So that's why a Saturn transit can be different for so many people, because your weakness isn't someone else's weakness. What you're trying to avoid is not what other people are trying to avoid. It's very personal. So when we see, for instance, Saturn turning stationary direct, if it is in connection with anything really in your chart, but particularly if it's angling your own Saturn, this is time to really put those lessons into practice. We've now been struggling, we've lost things haven't gone well for us, we feel that life has not smiled on us. Saturn turns direct, it's time to put all those lessons that we've learned into practice and move forward with them. And of course, this is happening at the same time as a solar eclipse. New avenues potentially opening to us. So many things to kind of look forward to, even if we're still, in the process of getting there rather than actually are there. So I hope this kind of short little foray into Saturn has helped you think of this planet in a different way. And I think if we treat it as a helpful influence, even if we don't like it, it does change our ability to work with what we've got, which may be difficult at the time. So thank you for listening. And if you liked what you've heard and seen, please share it or please subscribe, because we want to spread good astrology. See you next time. Bye for now.